For 15 years, I traded with something that isn't supposed to exist. Every Thursday morning, without fail, I walked 1.5 miles into the Cascade foothills with whatever I could spare. And every Thursday afternoon, I walked back with something in return. Last week, it gave me something that's made me realize I need to tell this story before I lose my nerve completely. I'm 63 years old now, retired from the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, and what I'm about to tell you is the truth, whether you believe it or not. The thing is, I never wanted to be the kind of person who carries a secret like this. I spent my entire adult life as a forestry technician, a practical man who dealt in board feet and watershed management, not fairy tales. But some truths don't care about what you want or who you think you are. They find you anyway, and then you spend the rest of your life deciding whether the burden of knowing is worse than the loneliness of silence. It started in March of 2009. I remember the exact date because it was 2 days after my 48th birthday, and my ex-wife Linda had just finalized the divorce papers. I was living alone in a rental cabin off Highway 410, about 20 miles east of Enumclaw. The cabin wasn't much, 800 square feet of knotty pine and questionable plumbing. But it backed up to national forest land, and after 23 years of marriage that ended with her sister's husband, I needed the quiet more than I needed comfort. I drove a 2004 Chevy Silverado back then, Forest Service green with a dent in the driver's side door from where a Widowmaker branch had caught me off guard in 2007. Every morning, I'd make coffee in my Mr. Coffee machine, the same one I'd had since 1998. And I'd listen to Como News Radio while I planned my day. The routine was simple, predictable, and exactly what I needed. Survey the watershed areas, check for illegal logging activity, document any storm damage to the access roads. I'd pack my lunch, usually a ham sandwich on white bread, Lay's potato chips, and a thermos of coffee, and I'd head out by 7:30. That Thursday started like any other. The DJ on Como was talking about the economic stimulus package, and I remember thinking how strange it was that the whole world was falling apart financially while I was worried about creek erosion patterns. I took my usual route into Sector 7, a checkerboard of state and federal land that most recreationalists avoided because the trails weren't maintained and the old logging roads had gotten overgrown since the timber companies pulled out in the early 90s. The smell hit me first. I've spent 40 years in the woods, and I know the difference between a dead deer and a dead elk, between bear scat and cougar scat, between the sweet rot of old-growth decay and the sharp tang of fresh-cut Douglas fir. This was none of those things. It was musky, almost primal, like wet dog mixed with something darker, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Not decay, exactly, but organic in a way that felt deliberately alive. I was about 3 miles in on an old skid road when I noticed the tracks. Now, I need you to understand something about tracks. In my line of work, you learn to read them the way some people read books. You can tell how old they are by how the edges have softened, whether rain has melted them, how much debris has fallen into them. These tracks were fresh, maybe 2-3 hours old, and they were huge. 18 inches long, maybe wider, with 5 distinct toe impressions and a heel strike that had sunk 4 inches into the soft earth near a seasonal creek. Bear tracks are rounder, with claw marks extending well beyond the toes. These had no claw marks. The toe spread was wrong for a bear, too. More human-like, with a pronounced arch and a stride length that suggested bipedal movement. The distance between prints was nearly 6 feet. I'm not ashamed to admit my hands were shaking when I took out my digital camera, a Canon PowerShot that the department had issued me in 2008, and photographed those prints. I took 12 shots from different angles, made sure to include my Leatherman tool for scale. My training said, document everything, report anomalies. But something else, some deeper instinct, told me to keep this to myself. The prints led deeper into the woods, away from the maintained trails, into a section of old growth that had somehow survived the logging boom of the 70s. Western red cedars as wide as my truck, Douglas firs that had been saplings when the Civil War was still a recent memory. The forest floor was thick with sword ferns and Oregon grape, and the canopy was so dense that the morning light came through in dusty shafts, like light through cathedral windows. I followed those tracks for maybe half a mile. I shouldn't have. Protocol said document and report, don't pursue unknown wildlife. But something pulled me forward. Curiosity, maybe, or the kind of loneliness that makes you do stupid things just to feel like you're part of something bigger than your own failing life. The tracks ended at a nurse log, a massive fallen cedar that had been dead so long it had become a garden unto itself, covered in moss and mushrooms and sprouting hemlock seedlings. The log was easily 8 feet in diameter, and something had been sitting on it recently. The moss was compressed, and there were handprints. No, not handprints. Something close to handprints, but larger, with longer fingers, pressed into the soft wood where the rot had made it punky. That's when I heard the breathing. It came from behind me, slow and deliberate, like someone trying to stay quiet but unable to completely mask the sound of respiration. My first instinct was to turn around fast, but 40 years in the woods had taught me that sudden movements are what get you hurt. So I turned slowly, keeping my hands visible and away from my body, making myself as non-threatening as possible. I saw it through the salal and huckleberry brush about 30 yards away. The first thing I noticed was the eyes. Dark brown, almost black, but with an intelligence that was immediately, undeniably human. Not human-like. Human. The kind of eyes that have self-awareness behind them, that process and judge and feel. It was watching me with the same careful assessment that I was using to watch it. The second thing I noticed was the size. It was crouched, partially hidden behind a Douglas fir, but even in that position, I could tell it was massive. 7 feet tall, maybe more if it stood fully upright. The body was covered in reddish-brown hair, darker on the chest and shoulders, with a distinct widow's peak of longer hair on top of the head. The face was flatter than an ape's, with a broad nose and a heavy brow ridge, but the proportions were wrong for any primate I'd ever seen. Too human, but not human enough. We stood there like that for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. Neither of us moved. Neither of us made a sound beyond breathing. I was running through every wildlife encounter protocol I'd ever learned. Don't run. Don't make direct eye contact. Make yourself appear larger. But none of it seemed to apply. This wasn't a cougar or a bear. This was something else entirely. Something that was clearly thinking just as hard about what to do with me as I was thinking about what to do with it. Finally, it made a sound. Not a roar or a growl, but a low rumbling vocalization that came from deep in its chest. It sounded almost like a question, like it was testing to see how I'd respond. Without thinking, I said, "I'm not going to hurt you." My voice sounded strange in the dense forest, too small and too human. But the creature's eyes changed when I spoke. Not wider, exactly, but more focused. Like it was filing away the fact that I'd used language. Then it did something that changed everything. It reached down beside the tree where it was crouched and picked something up. For a terrible moment, I thought it might be a weapon. But it wasn't. It was a branch, maybe 3 feet long and stripped of bark. The creature held it up so I could see it clearly, then very deliberately broke it in half. The crack echoed through the forest like a gunshot. It wasn't a threat. It was a demonstration. The creature placed both halves of the branch on the ground between us, then slowly backed away into the undergrowth. Within seconds, it was gone, moving with a silence that shouldn't have been possible for something that size. The only evidence it had been there at all was the broken branch, the compressed vegetation where it had been crouching, and the smell, that thick, musky odor that lingered in the air like a ghost. I stood there for a long time after it left, trying to process what had just happened. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. But I wasn't afraid, not exactly. I was electrified. I had just seen something that officially didn't exist. Something that had looked at me with intelligent eyes and made a choice to communicate rather than flee or attack. I picked up the 2 halves of the branch and carried them back to my truck. I didn't tell anyone about what I'd seen. Not my supervisor, not my drinking buddies at the Natchez Tavern, not even my daughter when she called that weekend to tell me about her promotion at Microsoft. I told myself I needed to be sure, that I needed more evidence. But the truth was simpler and more shameful. I didn't want to share it. For the first time since Linda had left, I had something that was mine and mine alone. The next Thursday, I went back to the same spot. I didn't tell myself that's what I was doing. I made up some excuse about needing to check on a watershed assessment I'd started the week before. But I knew why I was really there. I was looking for it. For him. Because somewhere in that first encounter, I'd started thinking of the creature as a him rather than an it. I brought an offering. It seemed like the right thing to do, though I couldn't have told you why. I'd grabbed an apple from my fridge that morning, one of those pink lady apples that come in bags from Costco, and I'd wrapped it in a paper towel and stuffed it in my jacket pocket. When I got to the nurse log where we'd had our first encounter, I placed the apple on top of the log, centered it carefully, and then backed away about 20 yards and sat down on a mossy boulder to wait. Nothing happened for the first hour. Birds sang in the canopy, varied thrushes and winter wrens, chickadees and nuthatches. A Douglas squirrel chattered at me from a nearby snag. The sun moved slowly across the sky, and the forest went through its subtle shifts of light and shadow. I thought about leaving a dozen times, but something kept me there. Some stubborn refusal to admit that I might be losing my mind. He came in the second hour. I didn't see him approach. He was just suddenly there, standing at the edge of the clearing, maybe 50 feet away. In full daylight, he was even more impressive than I'd remembered. The hair was a deep auburn color in the sunlight, graying around the muzzle and temples in a way that suggested age. The arms were long, proportioned more like a gibbon's than a human's, but the hands were unmistakably similar to ours. Opposable thumbs, fingernails rather than claws, a palm that could manipulate objects with precision. He looked at me, then at the apple, then back at me. The intelligence in those eyes was staggering. He was assessing, calculating risk versus reward. Then he moved forward with a fluid, rolling gait that reminded me of the way orangutans move when they're on the ground. He picked up the apple, examined it from several angles, then brought it to his nose and sniffed deeply. I watched as he bit into it. His teeth were large but flat, herbivore teeth designed for grinding rather than tearing. He chewed slowly, methodically, and I saw his expression change. A subtle relaxation around the eyes, a slight parting of the lips. He was enjoying it. When he finished the apple, he didn't immediately leave. Instead, he looked at me for a long moment, then reached into the thick moss at the base of the nurse log and pulled out a handful of something. He walked closer, not close enough to touch, but closer than before, maybe 20 feet, and placed whatever he'd been holding on a flat rock between us. Then he backed away and disappeared into the forest again. I waited a full 5 minutes before I approached the rock. What he'd left was a collection of mushrooms, chanterelles, golden and fragrant even in their fresh state. They were perfect specimens, completely free of slugs or rot, and they'd been carefully cleaned of dirt and debris. He'd given me a gift in return for mine. That was the beginning. For the next 15 years, every Thursday morning, I made that same 3-mile hike into the forest. I brought offerings, food mostly, but also other things. Apples and oranges in the fall and winter. Fresh bread from the Franz Bakery outlet in Enumclaw. Jerky from the Notch's Tavern. I brought tools that I thought he might find useful. A coil of nylon rope, a fixed blade knife in a leather sheath, a wool blanket that I'd had since my Forest Service days in the 80s. I brought books, though I never knew if he could read them. Thick picture books about the Pacific Northwest and field guides to local wildlife. And every Thursday afternoon, I walked back with something he'd left for me. More mushrooms in the autumn, chanterelles and matsutakes and boletes, species I recognized and some I didn't. Carved pieces of wood, shaped with remarkable precision despite having no obvious tool marks. Stones from the river, some with fossils embedded in them, others just beautiful for their color or shape. Once, he left me a complete elk skull, cleaned and sun-bleached, so perfect it looked like a museum piece. Another time, a bundle of cedar bark that had been processed into cordage, twisted and braided with a skill that would have made the old-time Indians proud. We never spoke. I tried a few times in the early days, simple things like, "Thank you," or "That's beautiful." But he never responded with anything more than a soft vocalization, that low rumbling sound that seemed to communicate acknowledgement without using words. Over time, I stopped trying to talk. The silence between us became its own kind of language, comfortable and sufficient. I learned things about him through observation. He was a creature of routine, just like me. He always approached from the west side of the clearing, moving with the sun at his back. He favored his left side slightly, and I wondered if he had an old injury. He was remarkably clean for something that lived rough in the forest. His hair was always well-groomed, free of mats or parasites, and he carried no odor of decay or illness, just that distinctive musky smell that I came to associate with him specifically. I learned that he understood cause and effect, that he could plan for the future. In the spring of 2011, he left me a bundle of young fir boughs at our trading spot, and I didn't understand why until I realized they were the perfect size for making a wreath. My daughter's birthday was coming up, and I'd mentioned to a coworker, probably within earshot of where he might have been listening, that I needed to get her something. He'd been paying attention. He'd tried to help. The thought haunted me for weeks. This creature, this thing that science said couldn't exist, had been listening to my conversations and had attempted to assist me with a human social ritual. What did that say about intelligence? About consciousness? About the definitions we use to separate us from them? I also learned that he wasn't alone. In the summer of 2013, I saw evidence of others. Different tracks in different sizes, movement in the distant trees that suggested more than one watcher. But he was the only one who ever approached. The only one who participated in our Thursday ritual. I came to understand that he might be serving as an intermediary of sorts, a bridge between his world and mine. The years passed. Obama's second term came and went. The Seattle Seahawks won the Super Bowl. My daughter got married, then divorced, then married again. I retired from the Department of Natural Resources in 2017, but I kept making my Thursday trips. If anything, retirement gave me more time to spend in the forest, to observe the subtle changes that mark the seasons in our trading ground. I watched him age. The gray around his muzzle spread to his shoulders. He moved a little more slowly, with more care. One winter, I think it was 2018, he didn't show up for 3 consecutive weeks, and I was certain he'd died. I mourned in my own way, sitting alone in my cabin with a bottle of Jim Beam that I'd bought specifically for the occasion. But on the 4th week, he was there again, thinner and moving with obvious pain, but alive. I brought him protein powder mixed with peanut butter, and he ate it all. We developed a kind of friendship, if that word can apply to whatever existed between us. I told him things I'd never told another living soul, speaking out loud to the empty forest after he'd gone, trusting that somewhere in the shadows he might still be listening. I told him about Linda and how the betrayal had cut deeper than I'd admitted to anyone. I told him about my father, who died of lung cancer when I was 16, and how I'd never forgiven him for smoking 2 packs a day despite my mother's begging. I told him about the time I'd covered for a coworker who'd falsified a timber survey report, and how the guilt still ate at me 20 years later. The forest kept my secrets. He kept my secrets. And, in return, I kept his. I never photographed him again after that first day. I never tried to document our exchanges or collect evidence of his existence. Some people might call that selfish, but I thought of it as respect. He'd trusted me with his presence, and I wouldn't betray that trust for curiosity or fame or scientific progress. The world didn't need to know about him. In fact, I became increasingly convinced that the world knowing about him would be the worst thing that could possibly happen. Last Thursday, March 7th, 2024, I made my usual morning hike. The weather was typical for early spring in the Cascades, overcast with a light drizzle that hadn't quite committed to becoming actual rain. I brought a bag of croissants from the Enumclaw Bakery, the kind with ham and Swiss cheese baked inside, and a thermos of hot coffee. My knees were bothering me more than usual. Arthritis, the doctor says, the price of 40 years spent walking rough terrain, and the hike took longer than it used to. When I reached our spot, I saw immediately that something was different. The trading rock, the flat granite surface where we'd exchanged goods for 15 years, had been carefully covered with fresh cedar boughs. On top of the boughs was a bundle wrapped in what looked like processed bark, the same kind of bark cordage he'd given me years before, but woven into a kind of fabric. I set down my offerings and approached slowly. The bundle was heavier than I'd expected, dense and deliberately wrapped. It took me several minutes to unwrap it, carefully setting aside the bark fabric because I knew I'd want to examine it later. Inside was a hand. Not a severed hand, let me be clear about that. It was a casting, a mold, made from some mixture of mud and ash and plant resin that had hardened to something like cement. It was the perfect impression of a hand, palm up, fingers slightly curled as if holding something. A human hand, unmistakably. Small, probably a woman's or a child's, with delicate fingers and a clear palm print, but it wasn't the hand that made my blood turn cold. It was what had been pressed into the palm. A coin. An old coin so corroded by time that I could barely make out the details. But I could see enough. A profile of a human face in the classical style. Letters around the edge in Latin. A date. MDCC-ISXCI, 1791. I sat down hard on the forest floor, still holding the casting, trying to process what I was looking at. This wasn't just a hand. This was evidence of contact, of interaction between humans and his kind going back more than 200 years. Someone had met one of them, had traded with them just as I had, and had given them this coin. And at some point, they'd created this casting, this record, this proof, and now he was giving it to me. I looked up at the forest, at the shadows between the trees where I knew he might be watching. "Why?" I said out loud, my voice cracking. "Why are you showing me this?" There was no answer, but I hadn't expected one. I wrapped the casting carefully in my jacket and placed it in my backpack. I left the croissants and coffee on the trading rock, even though I knew I was probably too shaken to eat. Then I sat down to wait, hoping he would appear, hoping I could somehow communicate the 1,000 questions that were burning through my mind. He came after an hour, but he didn't approach the trading rock. He stayed at the tree line, and even from that distance, I could see that something was wrong. He moved with obvious pain, favoring his right side, and his breathing was labored. When he finally lifted his head to look at me, I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Fear. He made a vocalization, longer and more complex than any I'd heard before. It rose and fell in pitch, almost melodic. But underneath the melody was something urgent. He repeated it 3 times, then placed one massive hand against a tree trunk and seemed to steady himself. I watched in horror as he slowly sank to a sitting position, his back against the tree, his chest heaving. I wanted to go to him, to help somehow. But some instinct told me that approaching would be wrong, that it would violate something fundamental in our relationship. So I stayed where I was, watching helplessly as he sat there gathering his strength. After a while, he reached into the thick moss beside him and pulled out another object. He held it up so I could see it clearly, even from 50 feet away. It was a photograph, encased in what looked like layers of dried sap or resin to protect it from moisture. Even from that distance, I could see it was old. The faded colors and yellowing paper of a Polaroid from the 70s or 80s. He placed the photograph on a stone, weighted it down with a piece of quartz, and then, moving with obvious effort, he stood and began to walk away. But this time he didn't disappear into the undergrowth. This time he stopped at the edge of the clearing and looked back at me one last time. His eyes held mine for a long moment, and I saw in them something that transcended species and language. Goodbye. Then he was gone, moving deeper into the forest than I'd ever seen him go. And I knew with a certainty that made my chest ache that I would never see him again. I waited another hour before I approached the photograph. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip it. I had to peel away several layers of the resin coating before I could see the image clearly. It showed 3 of them, 3 Sasquatch, standing in front of a massive, old-growth cedar. The one in the center was clearly my friend, though he was younger, his hair still a deep auburn without any gray. On either side of him were 2 others, one slightly taller and one slightly smaller. A family, I realized. His family. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was the person standing with them. He was young, maybe in his early 20s, wearing Vietnam-era combat fatigues and a faded green t-shirt. His arm was around the shoulders of the Sasquatch I knew, and he was smiling. Not a posed smile, but a genuine expression of happiness and camaraderie. The young man's face was weathered and scarred, marked by sun and wind and hard living, but his eyes were alive with joy. I turned the photograph over. On the back, written in faded pencil, were 3 words: Brothers, August 1973. I'm looking at that photograph now as I write this, propped up on my kitchen table next to the hand casting. I've spent the last week trying to understand what he was telling me by giving me these objects. I think I finally do. They've been watching us longer than we know. They've been interacting with us, trading with us, learning about us for centuries, maybe millennia. That coin from 1791 wasn't an anomaly. It was proof of a pattern, of a long history of contact that we've either forgotten or chosen to ignore. The photograph from 1973 shows something even more profound. That young soldier didn't just encounter Sasquatch. He formed a bond with them, lived with them perhaps, became part of their family structure in some way. And my friend, the creature I'd been trading with for 15 years, had been there. He remembered that time, treasured it enough to keep that photograph safe for 5 decades. He gave these things to me because he's dying. I'm certain of that now. The labored breathing, the obvious pain, the way he moved with such difficulty. He was saying goodbye, not just to me, but to this place, to this life. And before he went, he wanted me to understand that our relationship wasn't unique. It was part of a longer story, a deeper connection between our species that we've lost or abandoned or suppressed. The question that haunts me is, why did we stop? If there's evidence of contact going back centuries, what happened to break that connection? Why did they retreat so completely into the shadows that most people now think they're nothing but folklore? I think I know the answer, and it fills me with shame. We're too loud now. Too many of us. Too greedy. We've cut down the old forests where they lived, built roads through their migration routes, filled the wilderness with our noise and our trash, and our careless disregard for anything that doesn't serve our immediate needs. We made them afraid of us. We gave them every reason to hide. The soldier in that photograph, whoever he was, lived in a different time. In 1973, the Cascades were still wild enough, quiet enough, empty enough that you could walk for days without seeing another human. The old growth still stood. The creeks still ran clear. There was room enough for both species to coexist, even to form friendships. Now, the forests are fragmented patches of preservation, surrounded by clear-cuts and developments. The trails are crowded with hikers wearing GPS watches and listening to podcasts through wireless earbuds. Every square mile has been mapped and photographed and tagged on. Instagram, there's no room left for mystery, no space left for things that want to remain hidden, and so they're leaving, or dying, or both. The gift my friend gave me wasn't just a historical artifact. It was a memorial, a reminder of what was once possible and what we've lost through our own expansion and carelessness. I've been thinking about what to do with these objects. Part of me wants to go public, to show the world what I've been given and tell the story of my 15 years of trading. Maybe it would change something. Maybe it would inspire people to protect what's left of the wild places, to preserve the possibility that there are still things out there we don't understand and don't need to understand. But another part of me, a stronger part, knows that going public would be the ultimate betrayal. He gave these things to me specifically, entrusted them to my care because he knew I would understand their significance without exploiting them. To turn around and broadcast them to the world would be to violate the very foundation of what we built together. Trust. So instead, I'm writing this down. I'm creating my own record, my own testimony, and I'm going to seal it away with the casting and the photograph. Maybe someone will find it after I'm gone. Maybe they'll believe it. Maybe they won't. But at least the story will exist, preserved somewhere beyond my own failing memory. I went back to our trading spot this morning, Thursday, March 14th. It's been exactly 1 week since he gave me the casting and the photograph. I brought his favorite offering, sourdough bread from Enumclaw Bakery, and a bag of the Pink Lady apples that started everything. I placed them carefully on the trading rock, along with a letter I'd written the night before. The letter said simple things. Thank you. I'm sorry. I won't forget. I understand. I waited for 6 hours, long past the point where my knees were screaming and my back was a solid mass of pain. He never came. The offering sat untouched. The forest was silent except for the wind in the high branches and the distant sound of a creek running heavy with snow melt. I knew he wouldn't come, but I had to try one last time. As I was packing up to leave, I noticed something I'd missed before. A tree about 20 yards from the trading rock had a mark on it. Not fresh, but not terribly old either. Something had stripped away a patch of bark about 6 feet off the ground, revealing the white sapwood underneath. The shape was irregular, but deliberate, and when I looked at it from the right angle, I could see it was a handprint. His handprint, pressed into the soft cambium layer when it was fresh, now dried and hardened into a permanent scar on the tree. It was a message, a signature, a last marker of his existence in this place. I stood there looking at it for a long time, memorizing every line and whorl, trying to capture the exact size and shape of it in my mind. Then I took out my knife and carefully carved my own initials in the bark beside it, R.M., Robert Miller, so that anyone who might come after would know that he hadn't been alone, that someone had witnessed him, had known him, had cared. I'm 63 years old. The doctor tells me my heart is weaker than it should be, that the years of smoking in my 20s and 30s have caught up with me. I have maybe 10 years left, maybe 15 if I'm lucky. And I'll spend those years carrying this secret, protecting it, honoring the friendship of a creature that wasn't supposed to exist but was more real to me than most of the people I've known. I won't go public with this story. I won't contact researchers or documentary filmmakers or cryptozoology enthusiasts. They would want proof, and the only proof I have is too precious to share. The casting and the photograph will stay with me, hidden in a safe deposit box at the Enumclaw Community Bank, along with this written account and the coordinates to our trading spot. I've arranged for everything to be given to my daughter after I die, with instructions to make her own choice about what to do with it. Sarah's smart. She's careful. She'll understand why I kept this quiet. And maybe, if she's feeling brave, she'll make her own trip to Sector 7, to the clearing with the nurse log and the trading rock and the tree with the handprints. Maybe she'll sit there for a while and listen to the forest. And maybe, just maybe, someone will emerge from the shadows to see if the daughter of the man who brought apples every Thursday is worth trusting. I hope they do. I hope she gets to experience what I experienced, that moment of recognition across species lines, that acknowledgement that intelligence and consciousness and personhood aren't limited to humans. It changed me in ways I'm still discovering, and I think it would change her too. But if they don't come, if they've left this place forever, or if the last of them has died alone in some deep forest hollow, then at least Sarah will know. She'll know that her father wasn't crazy, that he wasn't spinning fairy tales to cope with loneliness. She'll know that for 15 years, He participated in something extraordinary, something that gave meaning to the back half of his life after the divorce had tried to take all meaning away. I've thought a lot about why he chose to reveal himself to me in the first place. Back in March 2009, I was nothing special. Just a divorced forestry technician going through the motions, marking time until retirement or death, whichever came first. I wasn't particularly kind or particularly wise. I was just there. But maybe that was enough. Maybe he saw someone who was alone, like he was alone. Someone who was navigating a world that didn't quite fit anymore. Trying to find purpose in routines and small observations. Someone who might understand what it meant to exist in the spaces between things. Neither fully part of the human world, nor entirely separate from it. Or maybe overthinking it. Maybe it was as simple as the fact that I left that first apple and waited patiently without demands or expectations. Maybe respect and patience are universal currencies, valued by any intelligent being, regardless of species. Whatever the reason, I'm grateful. The last 15 years have been the most meaningful of my life, not despite the secret I've carried, but because of it. Every Thursday morning became an act of faith, a ritual that connected me to something larger than myself. Every Thursday afternoon, I came home with gifts that reminded me there was still mystery in the world, still wonder, still things that couldn't be categorized or explained or controlled. In our modern world, we've convinced ourselves that we've mapped every corner of reality, that science has answered all the important questions, and the rest is just details to be filled in. We live our lives in little boxes, houses and cars, and offices and phones, and we forget that the world is bigger and stranger than we imagine. We forget that there are still shadows where unknown things might dwell, still silences where different kinds of consciousness might be listening. My friend lived his entire life in those shadows, in those silences. He and his kind have been there longer than we have, watching as we cleared the forests and built our cities and declared ourselves masters of the natural world. They've seen us at our best and our worst, have witnessed the full span of human history from a perspective we can't even imagine. And despite everything, despite the logging and the development and the noise and the intrusion, some of them still chose to reach out, to trade, to communicate, to maintain that ancient connection that maybe goes back to the very beginning, to when our ancestors were just one kind of primate among many, before we decided we were special and different and superior. That's what the hand casting represents, I think. It's evidence of continuity, of a relationship that has persisted across centuries despite our best efforts to pave over everything wild and free. Someone in 1791 gave a coin to one of them, probably in trade, probably in friendship. And more than 200 years later, that story is still being told, still being preserved, still being passed down through whatever cultural memory they possess. It makes me wonder about all the other stories that have been lost. How many other humans have encountered them over the centuries? How many soldiers and trappers and homesteaders and Indians had relationships with them that they never spoke about, that died with them and left no record? How many coins and tools and photographs are hidden in safe deposit boxes or attics or buried graves, waiting for someone to find them and wonder? My daughter will wonder, I hope. She'll look at the casting and the photograph, and she'll understand that her father's Thursday morning hikes weren't just about watching for illegal logging or checking water quality. They were about maintaining a bridge, being a witness, keeping alive a connection that the modern world has no room for. The last gift he gave me, those two objects wrapped in bark cordage, they're heavier than their physical weight. Their responsibility. their burden. They're proof that some truths are too important to keep completely silent, but too dangerous to shout from the rooftops. So I'm writing this down. I'm leaving a record, and I'm trusting that whoever reads this, whether it's Sarah or some stranger who finds this account years from now, will understand the balance I tried to strike between revelation and protection. Because here's what I know for certain. They're real. They exist. They're intelligent. They have culture and memory and relationships. They feel pain and joy and loss just like we do. And they've chosen to hide from us not because they're primitive or animal-like, but because they've learned through long experience that humans can't be trusted with knowledge of their existence. We would hunt them. We would study them. We would capture them and put them in zoos or research facilities. We would destroy their habitat in our rush to find them, photograph them, prove their existence to a world that demands proof of everything. We would turn them into commodities, into tourist attractions, into subjects of scientific papers and documentary films. And in the process, we would destroy the very thing that makes them special. Their wildness, their mystery, their choice to remain hidden. We would take away their agency and replace it with our own need to know, to categorize, to control. My friend understood this. That's why he only met with me in private, only came out when he was certain we were alone. That's why our relationship was built on routine and predictability. Thursday mornings when the forest was empty, when the weekend hikers hadn't yet arrived and the other forestry workers were focused on different sectors. That's why he never revealed himself to anyone else. Why there are no photographs or videos or incontrovertible proof beyond what he chose to give me at the end. He was protecting his people, his family, his species. And by trusting me with the casting and the photograph, he was asking me to continue that protection even after he was gone. I've thought about destroying them, burning the casting and the photograph so that no one would ever be tempted to use them as evidence or starting points for searches. But that would be wrong too. These objects represent something important. The fact that contact is possible, that understanding can occur, that two very different species can find common ground through simple acts of exchange and respect. They need to be preserved, but they also need to be protected. So they'll stay in that safe deposit box, along with this written account, and Sarah will have to make the choice about what comes next. Maybe she'll keep them hidden like I have. Maybe she'll find someone trustworthy to pass them to. Someone who will understand their significance without exploiting them, or maybe, and this is the hope I hold on to, maybe she'll go to the trading spot herself and find that the relationship didn't end with me, that someone else is willing to participate in that Thursday morning ritual. Because here's the thing about rituals. They persist. They carry forward. They become part of the fabric of a place, woven into the land itself until they're inseparable from it. I've walked that 3-mile route into Sector 7 more than 700 times over the last 15 years. My boots have worn a faint trail through the undergrowth. My presence has become predictable, expected, part of the pattern of that forest. Even if I never go back, even if my knees give out completely or my heart finally quits, that trail will remain for a while. The trading rock will stay where it is. The tree with the handprints will continue to grow, the bark slowly healing around our marks. And maybe, just maybe, someone else will find that spot and understand its significance. I've started to think of it as sacred ground, in a way. Not in any religious sense, but sacred in that it represents a meeting place between worlds, a threshold where the boundaries between human and other became permeable. Every culture has places like this. The ancient Greeks had their groves, the Native Americans their spirit lands, the Celts their thin places where the veil between worlds grew transparent. Our trading spot is a thin place, and for 15 years I was privileged to stand in it, to experience what it meant to be fully present in that liminal space where two species met as equals. That's what I'll miss most, I think. Not the objects he gave me, though I treasure them. Not the evidence that I was right about his existence. Though it's nice to have validation for something I never doubted. What I'll miss is the feeling of standing in that clearing on Thursday mornings, waiting to see if he would come, knowing that if he did, we would participate together in a ritual older than nations and more meaningful than words. There's a loneliness that comes with being the only witness to something extraordinary. You can't share it without inviting skepticism or exploitation. You can't prove it without violating trust. So you carry it alone, and over time, it becomes part of your identity, a secret weight that shapes how you move through the world. But there's also a kind of fullness that comes with it, a sense that you've been chosen, not because you're special, but because you were in the right place at the right time, with the right disposition. You were willing to wait. You were willing to respect boundaries. You were willing to participate in something without needing to understand or control it. I think about the young soldier in the photograph, the one standing with his arm around my friend's shoulders. I wonder what happened to him after August 1973. Did he go back to the war? Did he survive it? Did he ever tell anyone about his time in the forest with creatures that weren't supposed to exist? Or did he carry that secret to his grave, just like I'm carrying mine? I hope he had a good life. I hope the memory of that time, of being accepted into a Sasquatch family, of forming genuine bonds across species lines, gave him comfort in whatever hardships followed. I hope he understood, as I understand now, that some experiences are too precious to be shared widely, that some truths are best honored through silence and protection rather than proclamation. That photograph is more than just evidence. It's a reminder that we're capable of more than we usually demonstrate. We're capable of seeing past our own species, of recognizing intelligence and personhood in forms that don't match our expectations. We're capable of friendship without agenda, of trade without exploitation, of coexistence without domination. But we're also capable of the opposite, of clear-cutting old-growth forests for lumber, of pushing species to extinction through habitat loss, of dismissing everything that doesn't fit our scientific paradigms as myth or fraud, of privileging proof over respect, knowledge over wonder. The choice between those two paths is what the hand casting and the photograph represent. They're a test of our character, individually and collectively. What do we do when confronted with evidence of something extraordinary? Do we rush to share it? To profit from it? To turn it into spectacle? Or do we recognize that some things are more valuable when they remain mysterious, protected, allowed to exist on their own terms? I've made my choice. I've chosen protection over revelation, silence over fame, respect over proof. And I think that's what my friend wanted, what he was asking for when he gave me those final gifts. He was saying, I trust you to make the right choice. I trust you to understand what these objects mean and to treat them with the dignity they deserve. That trust, the trust of an intelligent being from another species, given freely despite centuries of reasons not to trust humans, is the most precious gift I've ever received. More precious than any carved wood or perfect mushroom or fossilized stone. It's a gift that carries obligation, And I'm trying my best to fulfill that obligation by writing this account and sealing it away with the physical evidence. When Sarah reads this, probably after I'm gone, I hope she'll understand why I made the choices I made. I hope she won't be angry that I kept this secret from her, that I didn't share it while I was alive. The truth is, I was protecting her as much as I was protecting him. Knowledge like this is a burden, and I didn't want to pass that burden to her while I was still here to carry it myself. But now it's hers. The trading spot, the ritual, the responsibility, all of it passes to her along with the casting and the photograph. What she does with it is up to her, and I trust her judgment just as my friend trusted mine. Maybe she'll be braver than I was. Maybe she'll find a way to tell this story that protects his people while still preserving the wonder of it. Maybe she'll become a guardian of that sacred space, fighting to keep it from development or exploitation, even without being able to explain why it matters so much. Or maybe she'll just visit it once, pay her respects, and let it return to the forest. Maybe that's enough. One more human acknowledging that we share this world with others, that we don't have all the answers, that there are still mysteries worth preserving. I'm writing this final section by lamplight in my cabin. It's late, almost 3 in the morning, and the forest outside my window is absolutely silent. No wind, no owls, no distant traffic from the highway. Just silence. The kind of deep silence that used to frighten me when I first moved here, but that I've come to treasure. In that silence, I can almost hear him. Not literally, of course, but in memory. That low, rumbling vocalization he would make. That sound of acknowledgement that needed no translation. I close my eyes, and I'm back in the clearing, watching him examine an apple or carefully place a carved piece of wood on the trading rock. I can smell the musk, see the intelligence in those dark eyes, feel the weight of being seen and accepted by something that had every reason to stay hidden. Those Thursday mornings were the best part of my life. Better than my wedding day, better than the birth of my daughter, better than any achievement or accomplishment I racked up during my career. Because those mornings represented something pure. Connection without expectation, communication without words, respect flowing in both directions across a divide that shouldn't have been crossable. And now they're over. The trading days are done. The ritual has run its course. My friend is gone, dead, or moved on to somewhere deeper and safer. I'll never know which. The clearing will return to just being a clearing. The trading rock will be just another granite outcrop. The handprints on the tree will eventually be covered by new bark, hidden again, forgotten. But I'll remember. And through this written account, others will remember too. The story will persist even after the physical evidence has crumbled to dust, even after the last tree in that clearing has fallen and rotted away. The story of a man and a Sasquatch who met every Thursday for 15 years and proved that friendship can transcend species, that communication doesn't require language, that there are still mysteries in this world worth preserving. That's what he gave me last week, really. Not just the casting and the photograph, but permission to tell the story. He knew he was dying. He knew our time was ending. And before it did, he wanted to make sure that someone would remember not just him, but the possibility he represented. The possibility of coexistence, of mutual respect, of a world where humans and Sasquatch can occupy the same spaces without fear or exploitation. It's a beautiful possibility, a fragile one that requires more restraint and wisdom than we usually manage to muster as a species. But it's there, proven by 15 years of Thursday mornings and a photograph from 1973 and a coin from 1791. They've been here all along. They've been watching us, learning about us, sometimes even reaching out to us. And the question isn't whether they exist. I know they exist. I have the proof in a safe deposit box. The question is whether we're worthy of that existence, whether we can learn to share the forest without destroying everything that makes it worth sharing. I don't know the answer to that question. My cynical side says no, we're too greedy and too destructive and too convinced of our own supremacy. But my hopeful side, the side that spent 15 years building a friendship with a creature that wasn't supposed to exist, that side says maybe. Maybe if enough people learn to wait patiently in clearings with offerings of apples and bread. Maybe if enough people choose protection over proof. Maybe if enough people remember that wonder is more valuable than knowledge, that mystery is more precious than certainty. Maybe then we'll earn the right to share this world with them as equals rather than as conquerors. Maybe then the trading days will return, and new relationships will form in new clearings, and the story will continue beyond my part in it. That's my hope anyway. That's the gift I'm giving to Sarah, along with the casting and the photograph. Hope that the story isn't over, that the possibility remains, that somewhere in the deep forests, there are still intelligent eyes watching, waiting to see if we've learned anything, if we've become worthy of trust. If you're reading this and you doubt any of it, I understand. I would doubt it too if I were in your position. But I'm asking you to sit with that doubt for a while, to consider the possibility that the world is bigger and stranger than you think, that there are still things moving in the shadows that science hasn't classified. And if you're reading this and you believe it, then I have one request. Don't go looking for them. Don't organize search parties or set up trail cameras or turn this into a mission to prove anything. Let them be. Let them have their shadows and their silence. Let them decide on their own terms if and when they want to reach out, because that's the real lesson of my 15 years with my friend. Contact has to be voluntary, mutual, built on respect rather than conquest. You can't force connection with something wild. You can only make yourself available and worthy of trust, and then you wait. I waited every Thursday for 15 years, and I was rewarded with the most meaningful relationship of my life. That's enough. I don't need more than that. I don't need scientific validation or public recognition or proof that would convince the skeptics. I just need the memory of standing in that clearing, watching an impossible creature examine an apple with all the care and attention of a connoisseur, knowing that in that moment, we were both exactly where we were supposed to be. That memory will carry me through whatever time I have left. And when I die, which could be tomorrow or 10 years from now, the heart specialist is frustratingly vague about timelines. I'll die knowing that I was part of something larger than myself. Something that connected me to a story stretching back centuries and possibly forward into a future I won't live to see. The trading days are over for me, but the story continues. In Sarah's hands, in this written account, in the careful preservation of a hand casting and a photograph. The story continues, waiting for the next person worthy of being part of it. If that's you, I hope you're patient. I hope you're respectful. I hope you understand that some things are more important than proof, that some relationships transcend the need for evidence or validation. And I hope you bring apples. Pink lady apples, if you can find them. They were always his favorite.